All right, hello, seventh grade. Welcome to reading for week 7. This is our second to last week. We don't have too much left and don't have too much reading left either. This week we're going to be doing review for an assessment that's coming next week. Now, an assessment is just kind of a fancy word for a quiz or a test. I'm not quite sure how long it'll be quite yet, but I'm thinking it'll be somewhere in between. You know, a quiz is usually pretty short, a test is a little bit longer, so that's why I'm using the word assessment. What I'd like you to do to work on these reviews is I'd like you to go to Google Classroom and find the assignment study guide in our list of assignments. Then open up the Google Doc that's attached to that assignment called 7th Reading Study Guide. Let me show you what that'll look like. So you'll go to 7th grade reading, click on the assignment study guide, and then open up this document. Now, you'll get your own copy of this document, so you can type on here and type your answers to all these questions. I'm not going to do that on this one, but I will do it on my copy that I made here. So as you go, you're going to type in your answers to each of these questions, and then you'll be able to use this study guide as sort of like your notes for our open note assessment next week. You could not fill this out if you wanted to. And you could just look through all the old Edpuzzles and look through your book for answers, or just try to remember it on your own for our assessment. But that will take a lot longer than if you have these notes written down. So I would really highly recommend that you write these notes down so that next week you have some good stuff to go off of for our assessment. Now, this study guide is not something that is due. I did give it a due date in Google Classroom, May 8th, right up here, just so that it would show up in your sort of to-do list over here so you could find it easily. But you don't need to turn it in. All you need to do is use it so you can write down some notes. So let's begin our review for today. Okay. So as we go, I'm going to have you type in your answers to the study guide's questions once again so that you can look at those when we do our assessment next week and better answer the questions. As we go through, look for this book icon. Information by that icon is going to go into our study guide. I'll make sure to pause as we go and give you a little reminder to go and write down that information, but just in case I forget, I put these little pictures around so that you can know, all right, I need to pause, write down this information, and then come back to the video. Our first thing we're going to review is headings and subheadings, and this was a long time ago that we talked about this. But headings and subheadings are really good tools for finding an author's purpose. So if we need to figure out, okay, what is this book about? What is this article about? We can take a look at headings and subheadings. You'll find those in the book or article, but you'll also find them in the table of contents. So this is our first thing we need to write down. Go ahead and pause your video, and we're going to go to, well, don't pause it quite yet. Pause it after I explain this. We're going to go over to your study guide and write your answer in here. Now, what I did is I hit spacebar a bunch so that I can put my answer right underneath the question. And I'm going to change the color of my answer so I can see it a little easier. But the answer to number 1, what are some tools we can use to figure out an author's purpose, are headings and subheadings. And that's it. So go ahead and type that in, and then you can start the video up again. Okay, so headings are titles that describe what information is in a section of text. Go ahead and write this sentence in underneath number 2 in your study guide. Headings are sort of like, chapter titles are a good example of headings. They give you sort of an idea about what the next piece of or chunk of information is going to be about. Okay, subheadings are smaller titles underneath big headings that describe more specific information in a section of text. So go ahead and write this statement as well in your review guide for number 3. Okay, let's look at an example. So let's say you open up a new book. This is a made-up book, and this is what you see in the table of contents. It says the rise of Greece is like chapter 1. That's the first heading. The subheading underneath that one is defeating Persia in 500 BC. Okay, then we've got Chapter 2. Next heading is The Fall of Greece, and the subheading for that one is Falling to Rome in 146 BC. So you can tell Chapter 1 is going to be about the rise of Greece, and there's going to be a section in Chapter 1 all about defeating Persia, and the same sort of thing with Chapter 2, The Fall of Greece. I'd like you to tell me, what do you think the purpose of this whole book is? It can be a very basic, simple statement. Why do you think the author wrote this book? Take a look at these headings and subheading titles. See if you can figure out what it is. It will probably be an answer as simple as, this book is about, and then give me an idea of what it's about. If you have any questions, let me know. Okay, so now that you've written that down in your review guide, let's move on to reviewing the big question from this unit. So this unit, our big question was, what kind of knowledge is important for us to learn? All of our stories had something to do with that question. What I'd like you to do is list one piece of knowledge that you learned from one of our texts that you believe was important. Explain the text that piece of information came from and why you believe that piece of information was important. So that's 3 things I'd like from you here. Give me one piece of information that you think was important. Explain where that piece of information came from, and then why you believe it was important. Now, we read a lot of different texts during this unit, 6 to be precise. So let me give you a quick review over what those texts are in case you can't quite remember them. The first one we read was called All Together Now. We used this one to practice finding logos, pathos, and ethos, and we'll be discussing that on Wednesday. But in this speech, Barbara Jordan is talking about the importance of accepting people of all different races and backgrounds. So was there any piece of information from that article that was important to you, or that you think is important to learn? If you need to refresh your memory a little bit more, you can go to find it on page 214 of our book. We also read Rattlesnake Hunt. I was a big fan of this story. This was an autobiography, which means it's a true story written about the author's life. So Marjorie Kinnan Rawlings wrote about her adventure in overcoming her rattlesnake fear. If you need a refresher on that one, it's on page 222. Next, we read Barrio Boy, which was another autobiography about Ernesto Galarza's transition to an American school and the English language. It was the story about how he was a first grader coming from a school in Mexico and going to a school in English, trying to learn the language and learn about what the United States was all about. That's on page 234. We read A Day's Wait, which was, I think that was our only fiction story. So our only story about made-up events. And it's about a boy who gets a fever of 102, which he believes means he's not going to make it. Now, he had heard that a fever of 46 was a deadly one, but he had heard that from people who used Celsius. And this temperature is using Fahrenheit. So he learns a little bit about the difference between those two, and it ends pretty well. This is on page 240. No Gumption. Okay, this was my favorite story that we read. It was another autobiography about how Russell Baker struggled to find motivation to be a paperboy in his childhood, and that's on page 266. The last story we read, I guess this was a text. This was an article called Intrinsic Motivation Doesn't Exist, researcher says. And this was just a short article about how people are motivated. So if you remember any pieces of important information that you learned from any of these texts, go ahead and choose one right now and go to your study guide and answer this question. Give me that one piece of important information you learned. Tell me where you got it from and why you believe it was important. All right, that's all we've got for today. Tomorrow we'll be talking about fact versus opinion and fiction versus nonfiction. So good work today. If you have any questions about how this review guide stuff is going to work, let me know. I'm happy to help. All right, thanks for joining me, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.